Dear ladies and gentlemen, at the request of the organization Save Our Wild Horses, I gave you a brief overview of the rewilding work in Europe, in which free living herds of horses play an important role. I am Wouter Helmer, co-founder of Rewilding Europe, and have been involved in rewilding from the very beginning, first in the Netherlands, later on in Europe. Common thread in my work, wilder nature can be our ally in socio-economic issues, and that's why investing in wild nature also makes economic sense. On this first slide, for example, you can see an example of rewilding with European bison in combination with drinking water production for the Dutch metropole. Wilder nature is here at the basis of good groundwater quality. Imagine this picture is less than 15 kilometers from Amsterdam. For me, it all started some 35 years ago with a new vision on the Dutch river area. At that time, there was a revolutionary idea, Plan Ooievaar, or Plan Stork, as it's called in English. This plan advocated the reduction of flood risks, not by further raising dikes, but by lowering and rewilding the floodplains. We have further elaborated this for WWF in their Living Rivers campaign in 1992, and put it into practice in a few pilot areas of first a few, later a few dozens of hectares. To transform intensively farmed floodplains into nature, the clay industry turned out to be an important ally. Already in 1993, WWF and the Royal Dutch Brick Factories signed a covenant, and since then, every brick has contributed to the rewilding of the Dutch river area. For those who are not familiar with this matter, it's good to know that in the Dutch Delta, sedimentation of clay is a natural process. Each flood deposits a thin layer of clay, building up to almost a meter in a century. So clay is therefore a renewable source, as the annual supply is even 1.5 times greater than our need for clay as a building material. So that was the idea. And what initially started fairly small, really took off after the floods of 1993 and 1995. At that time, in the Dutch river areas, we had to evacuate more than 200,000 people, and we suffered billions in damage. Room for rivers became the national policy, and rewilding the default solution. Tens of thousands of hectares of new nature have been realized since then, sometimes in unconventional partnerships. The most challenging one probably along the border mews, at the border of Belgium and the Netherlands, where the gravel industry changed its commitment to supply 55 million tons of gravel, and normally via deep gravel pits, through surface gravel extraction over a river length of 45 kilometers. And by doing so, reducing flood risks and recreating an attractive natural environment. Here, the main picture is the situation after 30 years. After changing a 60-meter wide channel, the two pictures on top, into a braiding river. And because of the audience today, I added a picture of free roaming horses on the gravel banks actually a few weeks ago. Probably the most important success factor is that almost all these new nature reserves are fully open to bikers and hikers. This free access gives people a feeling of freedom. We supported this with education programs, going out with more than 150,000 children and their parents, creating special facilities like adapted wheelchairs, and supporting rewilding enterprises. In order to obtain the support of people, they really must be able to experience this new nature as their own new habitat. In rewilding areas in the Netherlands, we attracted 10 to 20 times more visitors than before, which created 5 to 10 times more jobs compared to the agricultural past in nature tourism. Appreciated by more and more people, the rewilding areas also appeared more often in the brochures of real estate agents. In the Gelderse Poort, one of the most famous rewilding areas, the value of the property is approximately 10% more than comparable areas without rewilding. Brokers refer to the proximity of free nature, with the free roaming herds regularly as image determinants of the environment. And this means approximately 500,000 euros per year extra tax income for the municipalities in this area. But also very important, the original reason for the rewilding plans turns out to be valid. In 2021, we had a summer high water along the border mews, higher than 1993, higher than ever before. And there was no damage, unlike those areas where no rewilding was applied. So rewilding appeared to be a robust example of climate adaptation. With regard to the ecological principles of rewilding, it concerns area-specific processes that shape the landscape. Abiotic processes such as flooding, erosion, and sedimentation in the river area, but also biotic processes such as grazing by large herbivores. Due to the ecological key role of large herbivores, we reintroduced conic horses from Poland, beavers from East Germany, and Galloway cattle from Scotland. Yes, important to say, I think, unlike in the US, cattle in Europe is indigenous. This picture shows an area grazed by horses and cattle that was a cornfield only 10 years earlier. Grazing, pruning, creating paths, sand bath, bull pits, healthy shit, carcasses, all this leading to the return of thousands of other species. Compared to traditional parceled landscapes that dominate the European landscape, you see here on the photos at the top, new landscape structures emerge, the two bottom pictures, with more natural gradients thanks to natural grazing. In these mosaic landscapes, species, especially the smaller ones, can more easily adapt to, for example, climate change. Imagine, climate change in Europe moves 11 meters a day to the north at the moment, which means that in traditional landscapes, species encounter hard limits every 10 to 20 days when they want to migrate with the climate change. While in the naturally grazed landscapes, both species of grasslands, shrublands, and forests could migrate more easily. Our growing and free-roaming, well-adapted herds became a link to a more international story. As the successes of Dutch river areas became more known, we saw a growing demand for our herds from abroad. First in neighboring countries like Belgium, Germany, the UK, but then also from Latvia, Bulgaria, Croatia. Organizations from all over Europe began to see that semi-feral herds could become a replacement for the disappearing livestock in marginal agricultural areas. In this way, we became more and more aware of major demographic change in Europe, with massive urbanization on the one hand and large-scale land abandonment on marginal areas on the other. Almost 1 million hectares per year is currently being abandoned, which means every 4 years an area with the size of Belgium, for example. On the map above, the dark green areas are the areas where the highest percentage of land abandonment. This is not only a socio-economic problem for rural areas, but also an ecological problem. What we see is a development towards intensive agriculture on the best soils and shrub encroachment and active passive reforestation on marginal lands. And everything in between is really at risk, which is more than half of European flora and fauna. These threats have since been recognized by European conservationists, but the traditional approaches fall short. Conservation was always framed with nature in a vulnerable position to be protected against society and intensively managed at high cost. With this traditional approach, only 9 to 90% of the estimated financing needs for Natura 2000, which is the European network of natural areas, only 9 to 90% of those costs is covered at the moment. And we cannot expect society to increase their conservation payments by 5 to 10 times. So it's really time for a new approach. In other words, can we lower the costs and at the same time increase benefits and improve quality of nature? This challenge is the basis of a new movement, Rewilding Europe, founded in 2011, and in the meantime active in 27 countries. Within this movement, the aforementioned problems are regarded as opportunity to build a new relationship between people and nature. Again, it's about nature-based solutions for modern socioeconomic issues, but now on a European scale. The main message of Rewilding Europe is simple, with 3 pillars. First, rewilding. Give natural processes a bigger role in shaping our landscapes. But it also should be linked with economic development, like nature tourism, water management, and social embedding is important. Create incentives for local communities to be careful with their natural assets. We tested in areas with a rewilding potential of more than 100,000 hectares, and we received 30+ nominations for this. We started professionally in 10 areas, and 3 to 4 more are in the pipeline. Promising are those initiatives that are locally anchored through a regional entity within a wider European vision, and they should represent different ecoregions and should focus on specific themes models. And below I will discuss some examples of stories that reconnect people and nature on a European scale. From the Mediterranean areas, and especially those ones that face high levels of land abandonment, we learn that these areas tend to grow dense, with shrubs or monocultures of planted forest, which make these areas very vulnerable for large-scale wildfires. And I think in the US, you encounter this phenomenon, for example, in parts of California. Part of the solution is scratched into rock walls in the Portuguese Coa Valley, one of the rewilding areas. 15 to 25,000 years ago, you see rock engravings that are all about horses, aurochs, and deer. We know that these large herbivores can be seen as grazing firefighters. Bringing back these animals under semi-wild conditions could be an important factor behind scaling up rewilding in Southern Europe. These large herbivores not only reduce the amount of flammable vegetation above ground, but also transport it via their shit to soil carbon. This brings us to another important aspect of rewilding that will contribute to massive scaling up of it. As virtually all our areas show, rewilding can make a major contribution to the storage of carbon in soil and vegetation. And that without extra costs for soil cultivation or planting or protecting trees. Rewetting of peatlands in Scandinavia, wetland restoration in European deltas, spontaneous forest regeneration, and extensive grazing all contribute to massive carbon sequestration. But perhaps the most effective way to implement rewilding on a large scale is to remove old, no longer functional dams from rivers. Europe has hundreds of thousands of such obsolete dams. Inspired by appealing examples from the US, a new big consortium of NGOs gathered in Dam Removal Europe has been active for several years now, freeing up thousands of kilometers of rivers, where water and sediment transport, fish migration, and the restoration of biodiversity in the broadest sense take place again in full. In cooperation with landowners and fishing associations, we restore spawning areas for salmon and trout. And we move from extractive fishing towards catch and release, which is a bigger economy with much larger populations of migratory fish. In the Oder Delta and Danube Delta, we saw failed polders from communist times with, and especially in the Danube Delta, desalinated soil due to high evaporation rates. Reflooding increases their productivity, not only for spawning fish and birds, but also for local communities that often have a tradition in fisheries. Tens of thousands of hectares have now been flooded again, with a massive wildlife comeback as a result, but also with an increasing economy in wildlife watching, sustainable fisheries, and an expanding tourism network with electric boats, camps, and guided tours. More upstream, natural water buffers, whether or not created by beavers, can both retain water in wet periods and provide water in times of drought. This approach is now widely used in the border regions of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. In Velebit, in Croatia, Rewilding Europe bought all the shares in 23,000 hectares of hunting concessions to create a no-take breeding zone of 10,000 hectares with a ban on hunting chamois and the release of red deer. In this core area, we established a network of wildlife watching facilities to diversify the business model. All of this in cooperation with local hunters that continue to hunt on wild boar, but then only in the buffer zones. Also in cooperation with hunting associations and with Bulgarian NGOs, we restocked large parts of the Rhodope Mountains with red deer and fallow deer to create the mosaic landscapes that make this part of Europe the most diverse of the continent. Being a prey for wolves, these deer distract the predators from livestock, which means that also shepherds are positive about this project. We are seeing a comeback of vultures in the area that already use wolf kills for 60% of their food. All of this leading to a growing economy around wildlife tourism. Because the spectacular landscapes and wildlife resulting from rewilding attract large numbers of nature enthusiasts. Special facilities such as photo heights, attractive routes, B&Bs, and a good range of regional products can further enhance this. The company set up especially for this purpose, Rewilding Europe Travel, contributes to new rural economies by promoting rewilding areas as destinations, offering attractive arrangements. All in all, this is a good reason for many areas and local communities to view rewilding positively and thus contribute to its scaling up. The final, virtually unexplored theme for scaling up rewilding is the relationship between nature and health. Bookcases have been written about this theme, but it's now time to put scientific knowledge into practice and to use health budgets also out of self-interest for preventive health care through new nature reserves, especially in the vicinity of cities. To further scale rewilding, it's important that the numerous initiatives that are currently taking off in Europe learn from each other through the exchange of knowledge and practical experience. For this purpose, Rewilding Europe established the European Rewilding Network, now with 85 participants in 27 countries, covering almost 5 million hectares. And this is the picture that more or less summarizes the story of all these initiatives. The final goal of the fast-growing rewilding movement is to reconnect modern society with wild nature. Or, in other words, after several thousand years of unraveling, we are trying to interweave complex ecosystems in a modern context for the benefit of both nature and society. Thank you.